Do you remember this classic comedic scene from Friends? The audience was laughing hysterically, but the truth is, the moment the director yelled, "Cut," actor Tate Donovan ran straight into the dressing room, locked the door, and burst into tears. Why? Because at the very moment they were acting out this romantic scene on TV in real life, they had just called off their engagement. And the network knew that, but they still forced them to continue. This is the cruelest hidden side behind the laughter of the hit series, Friends. This level of psychological exploitation was only possible because of one thing: the absolute monolithic power of 1990s network television. This was an era before streaming services. If a show caught fire, it didn't just entertain, it controlled the culture. Friends was the undisputed king, a billion-dollar anchor for NBC that dictated global trends. Against a corporate giant like that, an actor's personal pain was irrelevant. At the very center of this corporate storm was Jennifer Aniston. The studio had meticulously marketed her as the ultimate girl next door, and the public consumed her image with an insatiable appetite. Women across the globe walked into salons demanding her exact haircut. The tabloid press scrutinized her every move, transforming her private life into public property. When she began dating actor Tate Donovan in the mid-90s, the media immediately branded them as a Hollywood fairy tale. Donovan was a highly respected, successful actor in his own right. He had recently provided the lead voice for a massive Disney animated feature and was a familiar face in the industry. Together, they made sense. They were young, attractive, and heavily photographed at premieres and industry events. For 3 years, they built a genuine life together away from the cameras. They adopted a dog, they exchanged rings and became engaged. They shared a home and a deep mutual affection that managed to survive the initial shock waves of Aniston's skyrocketing fame. But human relationships are fragile structures, and they often buckle under the crushing, sustained weight of public scrutiny and demanding shooting schedules. The television industry demands absolute dedication. Actors work punishing hours on set, followed by weekends filled with press junkets, photo shoots, and promotional obligations. The exhaustion seeps into the foundation of a partnership. By the time the 4th season of the comedy went into production in early 1998, the fairy tale the magazines had been selling was officially over. After 3 years of shared history, Aniston and Donovan had made the painful, private decision to end their engagement and separate. Anyone who has navigated the end of a serious long-term relationship understands the visceral pain of those first few weeks. It is a period defined by raw nerves, sudden tears, and the desperate need for physical and emotional distance. The standard protocol for a breakup is to separate your lives, return the keys, and avoid seeing the other person until the grief has had time to settle. The entertainment industry, however, does not recognize human grief as a valid reason to halt production. In a move that highlights the staggering lack of empathy within the studio system, Donovan was cast for a prominent 6-episode arc on the show, precisely at the moment their real-life relationship was disintegrating. He was hired to play Joshua, a wealthy personal shopping client working with Rachel Green. The screenplay demanded a specific, highly energetic dynamic. Joshua was the prize, and Rachel was the desperate pursuer. The writers crafted a storyline that required Aniston to do everything in her power to win this new man over. The scripts called for the absolute peak of the honeymoon phase. This is the era of a relationship defined by nervous excitement, constant flirting, and the overwhelming desire to impress a new partner. Aniston was forced to perform a series of humiliating high-energy comedic stunts to convey this desperate infatuation. She had to squeeze into her old high school cheerleader outfit to do a routine for him. She had to perform physical comedy that resulted in a fake fat lip. She ultimately had to put on a wedding dress to scare him away in a fit of manufactured panic. The irony of the situation was entirely suffocating. To play a woman desperately trying to start a relationship, Aniston had to look directly into the eyes of the man she was actively mourning. She had to project an image of hopeful, naive infatuation toward the exact person from whom she was trying to disconnect. The cruelty of the traditional sitcom format is the presence of the live studio audience. Single-camera dramas are filmed in closed, quiet sets, offering the actors a shred of privacy between takes. Sitcoms are filmed like theater. Aniston and Donovan were not suffering in a closed, private environment. They were forced to perform the autopsy of their fractured romance in front of 300 cheering tourists on a brightly lit soundstage in Burbank, California. Every time they stepped onto the set, they were met with blinding lights, multiple camera lenses tracking their every micro-expression, and a live audience primed to laugh at their manufactured awkwardness. They had to stand inches apart, breathe the same air, and recite dialogue about first dates and new attractions, while their shared history lay in ruins just beneath the surface. The network faced a distinct choice when the personal lives of their actors collided so violently with the production schedule. They could have easily recast the role of Joshua. They could have recognized the profound psychological distress of forcing two grieving people to simulate a romance and simply hired a different actor. But the studio system operates as a ruthless corporate machine. Recasting costs money. It breaks contracts. It delays the tightly managed shooting schedule. Furthermore, the studio executives were acutely aware of the media landscape. Having a real-life couple sharing the screen was absolute tabloid gold. It guaranteed magazine covers, breathless entertainment news segments, and heightened viewer curiosity. The fact that the couple was secretly fracturing only made the footage more valuable to the network. They prioritized a public relations victory and the integrity of the shooting schedule entirely over the mental well-being of their employees. The legal mechanics of the entertainment industry offer absolutely no provisions for human fragility. When a signature is placed on a studio contract, the actor ceases to be a private individual with a personal life. They are instantly transformed into a highly insured, strictly managed corporate asset. Tate Donovan signed the agreement to appear in 6 episodes of the program, just as the final fatal fractures in his relationship with Jennifer Aniston were occurring. By the time the ink was dry and the shooting schedule was locked, the romance was dead, but the legal obligation to pretend it was just beginning was entirely binding. To comprehend why neither actor simply walked away from this torturous arrangement, one must understand the ruthless power dynamics of 1990s television. The studio system held all the cards. If Donovan had called his agent and demanded to be released from the contract due to a personal breakup, the repercussions would have been swift and professionally devastating. Walking away from a commitment on the most successful comedy in the world is not viewed as an act of self-preservation. It is branded as a breach of contract. The network would have launched a barrage of legal threats. Worse than the financial penalties would be the industry blacklisting. He would have been instantly labeled as difficult to work with, a reputation that can quietly kill a career in Hollywood. Aniston was trapped in an even tighter vice. As a core cast member, she was the face of the franchise. Complaining about a guest star, even one she was actively separating from, would risk painting her as a diva in the eyes of the ruthless tabloid press. The television machine operates on momentum and money. It does not possess an HR department equipped to handle the emotional devastation of its lead actors. The unspoken rule of the industry was loud and clear: take the paycheck, hit your marks, and leave your personal problems at the studio gate. The torture began on Monday mornings. In the production cycle of a weekly sitcom, Mondays are reserved for the table read. This is a sterile, brightly lit environment where the executives, the writers, the producers, and the cast sit around a massive conference table to read the script aloud for the first time. Imagine the surreal, suffocating agony of sitting in a room filled with 50 industry professionals, clutching a freshly printed script and reading stage directions that dictate you must look at your recent ex-partner with undeniable lust. They had to sit across from one another, sipping lukewarm coffee, and read dialogue designed to be sparkling, flirtatious, and full of romantic tension. The rest of the core cast, Courtney Cox, David Schwimmer, Matt LeBlanc, Matthew Perry, and Lisa Kudrow, were acutely aware of the reality of the situation. They formed a tight protective circle around Aniston, offering silent support, but they were ultimately powerless against the dictates of the script. The writers, sitting just a few feet away, were busy taking notes on the comedic timing, entirely oblivious to, or actively ignoring, the genuine psychological distress radiating from the two actors reading the lines. When the production moved from the table read to the soundstage for rehearsals, the situation devolved from awkward to actively painful. The mechanics of filming a television romance require intense, unnatural physical proximity. Cameras need tight framing to capture the subtle facial expressions that sell a joke or a romantic spark. The director would step in to adjust their positions, physically moving them closer together. Imagine the biological confusion and emotional whiplash of this process. They were receiving professional, authoritative instructions to touch each other more affectionately, to hold a gaze a second longer, to lean in closer. They had to smell the familiar perfume or cologne of the person they were trying to forget. The body remembers intimacy, even when the mind is trying to sever the connection. Every time the director yelled action, they had to suppress the heavy, suffocating grief of a dying 3-year relationship and artificially manufacture the giddy, breathless energy of a first date. They were essentially being paid to gaslight their own nervous systems. Meanwhile, the corporate machinery of the NBC network recognized a golden marketing opportunity and moved to aggressively exploit it. The marketing executives did not view the casting of Donovan as an unfortunate scheduling conflict. They viewed it as a phenomenal public relations hook. The network's must-see TV Thursday night lineup was an advertising behemoth. To maximize viewership, the promotional department cut television trailers heavily featuring the real-life couple. The advertisements practically winked at the audience, teasing the undeniable chemistry between Rachel Green and her handsome new client, relying on the public's knowledge of their off-screen romance to drive the ratings higher. The sheer volume of people tuning in was staggering, often exceeding 25 million viewers a week. The network took the private, quiet death of a relationship and broadcast it through a megaphone to the entire world, framing it as a light-hearted romantic comedy. This is the ultimate disturbing reality of the entertainment business, the systematic commodification of human emotion. The grief and discomfort experienced by Aniston and Donovan were literally underwriting corporate bonuses. As the ratings spiked during this 6-episode arc, The cost of a 30-second commercial spot skyrocketed. The executives in the boardroom celebrated the success of the storyline, toasting the brilliant chemistry on screen. They were entirely insulated from the human cost of their product. The actors were trapped in an environment that actively punished genuine emotion and handsomely rewarded the successful masking of it. In a standard office environment, if two colleagues end a relationship, they can actively avoid each other in the break room. They can request to be moved to different departments. They are allowed the basic human dignity of distance to facilitate the healing process. In the brutal arena of network television, there is no distance. You are contractually mandated to stare into the eyes of the person who broke your heart, smile brightly, and deliver the punchline perfectly on cue. The studio had successfully locked them in a brightly lit cage, and the audience was laughing too loudly to hear the locks click shut. The physical architecture of a television studio is designed to maintain an illusion. Stage 24 at the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank was a cavernous industrial warehouse transformed by plywood, paint, and thousands of watts of lighting into the cozy, inviting apartments of Manhattan. It was loud, chaotic, and crawling with hundreds of crew members, writers, and producers. But just a short walk away from the glaring lights of Central Perk lay a starkly different environment: the dressing rooms. These small, sterile trailers parked outside the sound stage were the only private sanctuaries available to the actors. During the filming of Season 4, the journey from the brightly lit set to the quiet isolation of those trailers became a daily psychological gauntlet for Tate Donovan and Jennifer Aniston. The moment the director yelled "cut," the manufactured energy of the sitcom instantly evaporated. The studio audience would settle down, the cameras would stop rolling, and the actors were briefly released from their characters. For Donovan, this immediate transition was devastating. He later admitted in candid interviews that working on the show during the collapse of his relationship was one of the most agonizing experiences of his life. He would finish a scene, perhaps delivering a punchline, or exchanging a manufactured flirtatious glance with the woman he was losing, and then turn his back to the cameras. He would walk off the set, navigate the labyrinth of cables and lighting stands, and step out into the blinding California sun to reach his trailer. Once he closed the heavy door of his dressing room, the silence was deafening. He was entirely alone. Stripped of the script and the character of Joshua, the adrenaline of the performance crashed, leaving nothing but the raw, unmedicated reality of his grief. Donovan confessed that he would sit in his trailer and simply weep. The tears were not an actor's preparation. They were the involuntary physical response of a human being pushed beyond his emotional capacity. He was trapped in a bizarre purgatory. His workplace demanded that he simulate the euphoric beginnings of a romance with the exact person who was currently leaving a massive void in his actual life. Every laugh he earned from the audience felt like a cruel joke at his own expense. He was crying in secret so that millions of strangers could laugh in public. While Donovan grappled with his grief in the isolation of his trailer, Jennifer Aniston faced a completely different, yet equally crushing set of pressures. As a core cast member and the comedic anchor of the network's most valuable asset, she did not have the luxury of disappearing. The call sheet dictated that she was in almost every scene. The production schedule was a relentless, multi-million-dollar train that could not be delayed. She bore the immense burden of carrying the narrative momentum of the episode. For Aniston, the makeup chair served as the boundary line between her shattering reality and her corporate obligation. It was not merely a place for cosmetic touch-ups. It was the station where she was forced to put on her psychological armor. She would sit in the chair, swallow the heavy lump of grief in her throat, and allow the hair and makeup team to physically transform her into Rachel Green. She had to compartmentalize her heartbreak with surgical precision. She was required to completely dissociate from Jennifer, the woman whose 3-year engagement was ending, and download the personality of Rachel, the bubbly, slightly oblivious, and intensely infatuated waitress. This required a staggering amount of emotional labor. She had to summon an infectious, bright energy from a reservoir that was completely empty. If her energy dipped, the scene would die. If her eyes looked red or swollen, the lighting technicians would have to adjust, costing the production time and money. The entire crew, from the camera operators to the script supervisors, depended on her ability to perform joy on command. She could not show weakness. She had to step out of the makeup chair, walk back under the hot studio lights, look at Donovan, and execute flawless comedic timing. She was a professional athlete of comedy, playing through a severe invisible injury. The entertainment industry possesses a deeply twisted vocabulary. When directors, producers, and executives witness an actor pushing through profound personal trauma to deliver a performance, they invariably praise it as consummate professionalism. They applaud the actor's dedication to the craft and their commitment to the team. But this terminology is a sanitized mask for a much darker reality. What the industry labels as professionalism is, in practice, a demand for complete emotional suppression. The system does not reward the human being. It rewards the machine. By praising Aniston and Donovan for their professionalism, the industry was actively validating a toxic environment. They were essentially being told that their personal agony was irrelevant and that their only true value lay in their ability to hide that agony from the consumer. They were compensated handsomely, but the paycheck was a transaction for their humanity. They were paid to switch off their nervous systems. Human heartbreak is rarely a tidy process. When a deep emotional bond shatters, the immediate aftermath is typically chaotic, defined by sharp words, sudden anger, and a desperate need to assign blame. The instinct to lash out is a basic defense mechanism against profound pain. In a high-stakes, high-stress environment, like a Hollywood soundstage, that instinct is magnified 100-fold. The grueling hours and the constant scrutiny create a pressure cooker where even minor disagreements between actors can detonate into massive public feuds. Yet the most remarkable aspect of the 6 weeks Tate Donovan and Jennifer Aniston spent filming together is not the cruelty of the network that forced them there. It is the astonishing grace with which they treated each other. They possessed every opportunity and every excuse to weaponize their environment. A television set offers countless ways to passively, aggressively sabotage a former partner. An actor can deliberately step on a line, ruin the comedic timing of a joke, or refuse to make eye contact during a crucial close-up. They can retreat to their corners, communicate only through assistance, and make the atmosphere so toxic that the entire crew suffers. Neither Aniston nor Donovan chose this path. Despite the deep bleeding wounds of their recent separation, they flatly refused to turn their shared workspace into a battlefield. Instead, they exhibited a profound, quiet dignity. They navigated the bizarre surrealism of their situation with mutual respect, choosing empathy over resentment. They showed up on set on time, hit their marks, and delivered the material. But underneath the required professional veneer, there was a silent acknowledgement of their shared trauma. They were the only two people on the planet who truly comprehended the specific agonizing absurdity of what they were being asked to do. They were grieving the exact same loss in the exact same room under the exact same blinding lights. This shared suffering forged an unspoken solidarity. They did not fight. They simply endured the grueling 6-episode arc together. This level of emotional restraint required a monumental effort, and it did not happen in a vacuum. The famous ensemble cast surrounding them played a critical, unspoken role in maintaining the fragile peace on the soundstage. The core group of actors had already established themselves as a fiercely protective unit, negotiating their contracts together and shielding each other from the predatory nature of the press. During this specific production block, that protective instinct was hyper-focused on their female lead. They acted as a human buffer. Between takes, they provided the necessary levity, distraction, and quiet support to keep the atmosphere from collapsing under the weight of the central tragedy. They kept the machinery moving, so Aniston and Donovan did not have to carry the emotional burden entirely alone. The true test of their character was not in the delivery of the dialogue, but in the spaces between the words. Acting is fundamentally about reacting. When Donovan looked at Aniston to deliver a line about how beautiful she looked, he was looking at the woman he had just planned to marry. When Aniston had to look back with a gaze of absolute adoration, she was looking at the man she was walking away from. It required a supreme act of compartmentalization to prevent the real tears from spilling over into the fictional comedy. They managed to successfully quarantine their real-world devastation from the fictional world they were being paid to inhabit. The sheer endurance required to complete the shooting schedule was staggering. Week after week, they returned to the lot, sat through the sterile table reads, stood through the awkward blocking rehearsals, and performed for the live audience. As the arc progressed toward its conclusion, the emotional toll compounded. The finish line was in sight, but the final scenes demanded even more farcical romantic tension. They pushed through the exhaustion, relying entirely on their discipline and their respect for one another to avoid a public breakdown. When the director finally called a wrap on Donovan's final scene, there was no massive celebration. There was no triumphant Hollywood ending. There was only the heavy, exhaling relief of two exhausted people who had survived a psychological marathon. The network had extracted its pound of flesh. The episodes were safely locked in the editing bay, and the corporate executives had secured their ratings boost. Donovan quietly cleared out his dressing room and drove off the studio lot, leaving the fictional world of Manhattan behind. Aniston remained forced to immediately pivot to the next storyline, the next joke, and the next laugh track, carrying the invisible scars of the past 6 weeks with her. They had given the machine exactly what it demanded, but they had managed to do it without destroying each other in the process. When the 6 episodes finally aired in the spring of 1998, the illusion was absolute. Over 24 million people tuned in to watch the culmination of the Joshua storyline. The audience sat in their living rooms, completely captivated by the polished, brightly lit final product. They saw a seamless romantic comedy, perfectly edited and accompanied by a booming laugh track. The public was blissfully ignorant of the devastation that had occurred on stage 24 just weeks prior. The corporate gamble had paid off spectacularly. The ratings were astronomical, the advertisers were thrilled, and the network successfully buried the real-life heartbreak beneath a mountain of sitcom trivia. The aftermath of this surreal production block sent the two actors on entirely different trajectories. Tate Donovan stepped out of the sitcom bubble and quietly moved forward. He carved out a highly successful, enduring career as both a character actor and a respected television director, completely severing his professional ties to the behemoth that was Friends. The distance allowed him to eventually heal, transforming the 6-week ordeal from a raw, bleeding wound into a surreal anecdote about the bizarre cruelty of his chosen profession. Jennifer Aniston, however, was anchored to the machine. She remained on the show for another 6 years, eventually becoming the highest-paid actress in television history. She had to continue walking the same sound stage, sitting in the same makeup chair, and delivering the same infectious energy that had made her a global icon. Yet for those paying close attention, this specific multi-episode arc remains a quiet ghost in her expansive filmography. It stands as a silent monument to the exact moment she transitioned from a talented comedic actress into a bulletproof industry veteran. She learned the hardest lesson Hollywood has to teach. The camera does not care about your heart. It only cares about your mark. Today, the landscape of television consumption has fundamentally changed. Through streaming platforms and endless syndication, these episodes are constantly rewatched by new generations, seeking comfort and nostalgia. But for anyone who knows the historical context, the viewing experience is permanently altered. The laughter ringing from the studio audience suddenly feels intrusive. The storyline loses its breezy 90s innocence and takes on a distinctly somber texture. When you rewatch the arc today, you are no longer simply watching a sitcom. You are watching a real-time documentary of human endurance. Look closely at the physical comedy, the frantic attempts to impress, the sudden appearance of the cheerleader outfit, the desperate wide-eyed stare. It no longer looks like lighthearted hijinks. It reveals itself as a brilliant, desperate acting exercise. Watch their eyes during the quieter exchanges. Beneath the witty dialogue and the precise comedic timing, there is a visible exhaustion. It is a masterclass in separating the artist from the human, a flawless execution of technical skill, while the internal emotional structure is completely collapsing. The enduring significance of this story extends far beyond 90s pop culture trivia. It forces a deeply uncomfortable reckoning with our relationship to entertainment. As a society, we demand our celebrities to be indestructible. We use television as a therapeutic escape from our own complicated lives, entirely reliant on the illusion that our comfort watches are created in an environment of joy and frictionless creativity. We want to believe that the people making us smile are smiling themselves. This narrative strips away that comfortable lie. It exposes the classic Hollywood studio system not as a warm, creative family, but as an unrelenting assembly line that processes human emotion into consumable content. It proves that the industry will eagerly commodify personal tragedy if it serves the bottom line, wrapping genuine grief in a laugh track and selling it during prime time. The legacy of Tate Donovan and Jennifer Aniston's final weeks together is a profound contradiction. It is a story of a corporate system that completely lacked empathy, navigated by two individuals who possessed an extraordinary amount of it. They were trapped in a uniquely modern nightmare, forced to publicly perform their own heartbreak for the amusement of millions. Yet, they refused to let the cruelty of the system corrupt their respect for one another. They did not break. They simply did their jobs, carrying a heavy invisible weight so that the audience could feel light. When the director yelled "cut" for the final time, they left behind a permanent record of the fragile beauty of the human experience. They gave the world a reason to laugh, precisely when they had absolutely nothing left to smile about.